We just coined a new phrase, which is robot, or I have, and it's a robot for robots. James doesn't agree that he calls it something else, but it's a robot, and it lives on this. It basically steals its energy by nicking all the flies from this UV fly killer, and it's a slave to other robots. That's why it's a robot.
There's a family of them. There are 5 robots, and each of them, you could imagine, sort of fills a different role. They're a little bit like a colony of ants or bees, whereby there are different roles and responsibilities of each of the robots. Some of them are like the queen bee, who just sits in the middle and sort of generates a lot of the excitement. Is the sort of central figure for the colony. Some of them are more sort of parasitical, or like workers. They're the ones that generate a lot of the power that the more redundant ones might utilise in their own functionality.
This is a microbial fuel cell, which through a very complicated process of cation exchange creates electricity from dead flies and moths.
Now normally these things kill flies via the sort of, I think it's a little hot wires around there on the inside. The flies die, and then they just fill up this sort of little piece that sits underneath. This is removed, and we have directly underneath the microbial fuel cell. So the flies would pass down and generate power. It's actually not generating power for itself. It doesn't have any sort of functionality whatsoever, except it's generating power. What it does with that power, it gives it to the other robots, which might be less capable of generating power themselves. But this is the flypaper robotic clock. So what we have is a belt drive here. There's a little motor behind that rotates this. This is the top roller. A belt goes between here, and that belt is made up of flypaper. So the flies would be attracted to the flypaper because I think it's covered in some kind of honey type material. They get stuck, they can't free themselves, and this motor is turning this belt very, very, very slowly, like much slower than that. It goes around the bottom roller, and if you get in close, you'll see that there's a little adjustable blade. And then we've got to play with the adjustment to see what works the best, but around 1 millimetre away from the belt surface. As the flies pass under the blade, it scrapes them off, and they fall down into the microbial fuel cell underneath. And then there's electrodes in there that passes electricity back behind into a capacitor bank, and that gives the energy for the motor to turn around, and also a small digital clock, which resides just there at the bottom. So it has some, as we were talking about earlier on, some sort of utilitarian functionality. It's fulfilling a need that we have in the house, i.e. to know the time. But we don't need any external power supply. If we run out of batteries and the shop's closed, if Armageddon comes along and the whole sort of fuel system breaks down, there's no more power stations, you'll still have a clock. So we see it as probably the nearest thing we'd liken it to is a barometer. It's not a necessity to have a barometer in the house, but they were a fine looking object. So this is the coffee table mousetrap robot. You imagine this sort of in your trendy loft apartment, they might have a slight mouse problem, so the mice would potentially be attracted to sort of crumbs and debris that have been left on the top of the table. They'd sort of see this route through. This is sort of based on the sort of toys and stuff that you get inside hamster cages. The mice would go through this hole, they'd arrive on the top of the table in this hole, and then we have the aperture mechanism under there. It's got a motion sensor, a beam of light that is constantly going across there, and if that's broken, kind of like the thing you'd see on Mission Impossible, the aperture opens and closes. That beam hypothetically being broken by the small rodent. The rodent would pass through the aperture and be caught in one of these things. Not this one, this is for one of the other robots, but this is a microbial fuel cell. It's slightly bigger. There's a sort of holding area where the rodent would actually cease to live, and then it would fall through, decompose, be broken down and generate the power that powers the mechanism. This is fulfilling the function of being a coffee table. You could imagine this existing quite happily in the house, but it might not actually generate enough power to keep it functioning. This one would benefit from coexisting with the parasitical robot.